Greetings from Oregon, the 33rd state, admitted to the Union on Valentine's Day, 1859. With 3.7 million residents, it ranks 27th in population.
It didn't go anywhere. There is not an E on the end of it. It's Oregon.
A former governor of Oregon, Tom McCall, once said, "Come visit us again and again, but for heaven's sake, don't come here to live." PR faux pas? Maybe. But it's also the kind of straight talk and progressive thinking that has made Oregon distinctive for many years.
This is a place that people feel that they can control their destiny if they work at it, and that volunteerism and public engagement in politics and political activism and social activism is the norm here rather than the exception.
There are very, very, very staunch conservative Republicans in Oregon, and they're the most extremely left liberals you can imagine are in Oregon, and they all coexist in this great state full of ideas and debate as a result.
Yeah, I think most Oregonians are independent. They're very free thinkers, and they're not afraid to say what they think and tell you where they're at.
Oregon is so progressive because otherwise no one would know who we were. They would have no idea where Oregon is. They think California goes right into Washington.
Oregon certainly put itself on the map in 1997 when it became the first state to legalize physician-assisted suicide, a decision no other state has made. On the other hand, Oregonians do have a law telling people they can't pump their own gas, but it's for a good reason. The irony here is that many Oregonians will almost always choose their bikes over their cars.
There's some mornings, some people joke about how the Hawthorne Bridge sometimes seems like the scene out of Vietnam. There's so many people on bikes going in and out from work every day.
Oregonians do enjoy the great outdoors, from the tall, dense forests in the western part of the state to the less familiar terrain of prairies and deserts that cover approximately half the state on the eastern side. 5 of our nation's 53 active volcanoes sit within Oregon's boundaries. Crater Lake, the deepest lake in the country and the 7th deepest in the world, was formed in the remains of an ancient volcano more than 7,700 years ago.
It's one of the first places where tourists drove out into the quote-unquote wilderness to see a spectacle like Crater Lake.
Oregon's wild salmon industry is one of the largest in the world.
I fillet all the way from 500 to maybe 9 to 1,000 pounds a day.
The state's rivers are rich in history as well. In 1805, these waterways brought Lewis and Clark to coastal Oregon. They landed in what is now Astoria, a town of about 10,000 at the mouth of the Columbia River. It is the oldest American settlement west of the Rockies. 40 years after the Lewis and Clark expedition, thousands of settlers began making the journey west on the treacherous Oregon Trail, so named as it ended in the Oregon Territory. A common misperception about the Great Migration is that hostile Native Americans were the #1 problem for the pioneers.
What we know from statistics, and historians have gone back and looked at this very closely, that most deaths along the Oregon Trail were caused by either drownings or accidental shootings.
I mean, just think about it. Oregon is made up of people who followed the Oregon Trail to the very end. who didn't stop somewhere along the way, but kept going. These are very fierce people.
100 years later, Oregon was the only mainland state that was attacked during World War II by a piloted Japanese aircraft. On September 9, 1942, Nobuo Fujita, a pilot in the Japanese Imperial Navy, was on an I-25 Japanese submarine off the coast of Oregon. The sub surfaced and Fujita climbed into a seaplane that was mounted on the deck of the sub and armed with small incendiary bombs.
The idea was that they would drop these on the forests of Oregon, and they would ignite the forests of Oregon and maybe the entire Pacific Northwest and would destroy this valuable resource.
Fujita flew southeast over the Oregon coast and dropped his bombs on Mount Emily, 10 miles northeast of the town of Brookings.
Didn't succeed in igniting the forest, but it certainly had a psychological impact on Oregonians and nationwide. Is this just the tip of the iceberg? Is this the beginning of a mainland invasion by the entire Navy? Very uncertain what this is representing.
Fujita himself survived the war to become a successful businessman in Japan.
And so in 1962, Fujita came back to Oregon and visited the site of where he had flown his plane. And it was this interesting gesture of peace between the United States and Japan, and for the most part, local Oregonians embraced Fujita.
The town of Brookings played another significant role in Oregon's history. It was one of several major lumber-producing towns in a state that is still the nation's leader in timber production. But this productivity came at a price. In its pre-computerized heyday, roughly 1850 to 1950, logging was such a dangerous profession that it inspired its own colorful terminology.
They had barber chair, which is a tree that splits in half as it's being cut and comes back and gets the individuals. And there's also widowmakers, which are the limbs that come out of the tree that can come down and hit somebody.
Today, the industry relies on huge computerized machines called tree harvesters. Now, one person can do the work that an entire crew of a dozen men did years ago.
There are machines that do everything. It takes one man to cut the tree and put it into segments for the mills, and it's all done by computer and a hydraulic machine. And they do that, takes the tree down, and probably processes in less than a minute.
Oregon will never be accused of being a state full of workaholics, as there are just too many other things to do besides making money. Just ask any Oregonian.
You can be snowboarding right first thing in the morning, get down to the river and windsurf for the afternoon, get in your car, drive here to the coast, and you're surfing the sunset.
In Oregon, people believe that you should preserve the greatness, the beauty of its nature for future generations. There is a kind of sense that it's not me, but everyone.
Look here, I'm talking about America, sweet America.